Good afternoon, everybody. Today I will be talking with you about how to change brake pads. Does anybody know an indication of how your brakes are going bad?
I do. Grinding. Vibration when it comes to a stop.
That's right.
Noises.
That's right. Those are a few things that can tell you that your brakes need to be changed. Also, you can measure your brakes. Brakes are brakes are measured like tires in 30 seconds of an inch. 30 seconds of an inch and they will no longer pass inspection and they're not safe. At that point, you run the risk of them cutting into your rotors, which at that point you'll have to replace your rotors as well. To begin changing your brakes, you will need to gather a socket set, brake cleaner, a small block, and a C-clamp. You also need to purchase a new set of brake pads. Make sure you get the correct ones for your vehicle. When you get all your stuff together, the first thing you want to do is break your lug nuts loose. This is using a lug wrench. You break it just enough so that you can turn it. You don't break it, don't take it all the way off yet. Once you have broken loose all of your lug nuts, you want to jack your vehicle off the ground about 4 inches. Then remove the rest of the lug nuts off. Pull your tire off and set to the side. First thing you're going to do after that is remove your brake caliper, which is usually held on with about 3 bolts, and you'll use your socket to pull those off. Make sure you turn those in the correct direction so you don't strip them. After you take off your brake caliper, you're going to remove the brake pads from there and inspect your rotor to make sure that there's no damage to the rotor. Make sure there's no grinding into it, as demonstrated in this image here. That's a bad rotor, it has to be replaced. And this is what your caliper is going to look like on your, this is your rotor with the caliper on it. And this right here is the piston inside your caliper. This image right here is using a socket to remove your caliper. Once you take your brake pads out of the caliper, you want to use the brake cleaner to clean the caliper and clean the rotor and make sure there's no debris in the way before you place your new brake pads on. If you put your brake pads back in the caliper and on the rotor and there's a rock or something in there, it's going to cut into your rotor. So after you put your brake pads back onto your caliper and you've cleaned everything, excuse me, I'm going to back up. Before you put your brake pads onto your caliper, you're going to take the block of wood, and as shown in this image, you're going to use the block of wood and the C-clamp to completely compress the piston into the brake caliper, which is shown here where it's all the way in, because if it's not pressed all the way in, you can't put your brake pads back on and they won't fit back on the rotor. Once that's done, you slide the caliper back onto the brake pad. You slide the caliper back onto the rotor. After you do that, you use your bolts that you took off for the caliper and put them back on. Do not over tighten them because this will strip them, and you don't want to strip those bolts because then you have to replace all the caliper and the rotor and everything behind it. Once you replace the caliper with the brakes, you're going to put your tire back on. Excuse me, we're going to back up. Have somebody go in your vehicle and pump your brake to release the caliper piston. It also is going to make sure that the caliper is functioning properly, because if it doesn't come back out, then it could be locked up and your brakes aren't any good like that. After they do that and everything's functioning properly, you lift your tire back on to these wheel studs right here. When the tire is flush up against these wheel studs, you put the lug nuts on just enough to hold it there. Don't tighten them down yet. After you put them on, lower your vehicle down after this is snug, like I explained. Then you're going to tighten your lug nuts down after the vehicle is lowered and torque them to the specified torque for your vehicle. But you have to tighten them down in a star pattern that's demonstrated here in this diagram. That way you don't cross thread them and the tire doesn't go on crooked, because that can break your wheel studs off, which are right here, and make your tire fall off while you're driving. Okay. Once the tire is tightened back on and you've torqued it, before you take off driving, you're going to need to go in your vehicle and pump your brake and make sure that it's tight and that it's not just losing pedal, which means it's flopping up and down on the floor. Because if it's flopping up and down on the floor, then you've got a bubble in your brake line somewhere, and then it has to be bled. Okay. Once it is a tight pump when you're pumping the brake pedal, you're done. You can drive off, and after 50 miles, you need to retorque your tires. That's to make sure the lug nuts are still secure on there. Anybody have any questions?